"Where is your mother?" asked my sister, Jeanette, her voice booming through the speakerphone on Christmas Day. "I evicted her," my son Alan replied, without a shred of shame. "She was just taking up space here. We need the room." He laughed as he said it. My daughter-in-law, Jimmy, sat on the sofa I paid for, smiling like she owned the world, rubbing her belly. They thought they had won. They thought because I was old, I was helpless. But they forgot who my sister was. Jeanette, a retired federal judge who had sentenced men far more dangerous than my ungrateful son, didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply picked up her other line and made a single quiet call. Moments later, their perfect life was transformed into absolute chaos. But let me tell you how we got here, because this story didn't start on that Christmas night. This story started long before, back when I still believed that a mother's sacrifice would always be rewarded with love, even from a son who no longer recognized me as the woman who gave him everything. It was a humid morning in Tampa. It usually is. My kitchen smelled of cloves and roasted pork. I have made a glazed ham every Christmas for 30 years. I made it when my husband, Frank, was still alive. I made it when my son, Alan, was a moody teenager who only wanted to play video games. And I was making it today in the kitchen of the beautiful 4-bedroom house that I thought was my forever home. I wiped my hands on my apron. I was tired, but it was a good tired. I'm 68 years old, and standing on tile floors for 4 hours isn't as easy as it used to be. But I didn't mind. I was doing it for family. I looked around the kitchen. It was a beautiful space. White cabinets, stainless steel appliances, a massive granite island. I remembered the day we picked out that granite. I remembered writing the check for the down payment. Actually, it wasn't just a down payment. It was the whole thing. 5 years ago, after Frank passed, the silence in my old bungalow became too loud. I was lonely. Alan had come to me with a bright idea. He and his wife, Jimmy, were renting a cramped apartment. They wanted to start a family, but they couldn't afford a house in a safe neighborhood. "Mom," Alan had said, holding my hand across my old kitchen table, "why don't we combine forces? You sell this place. We buy a big house together. You can have the in-laws suite. We'll take care of you. You'll never be lonely again." It sounded like a dream. But then came the paperwork. Alan told me it would be better if the house was solely in his name. "It's for estate planning, Mom," he told me, looking so earnest, so professional. "If you put it in my name now, we avoid all those inheritance taxes when you pass away. It protects the asset." I trusted him. He is my son. I changed his diapers. I paid for his college. I sat in the front row at his graduation. Why would I doubt him? So I sold my bungalow. I took the check for $400,000, my entire life's equity, and I handed it to him. We bought this house. I moved into the suite on the ground floor. It was smaller than what I was used to, but I was happy. I was with family, or so I thought. The sound of footsteps snapped me out of my memory. Jimmy walked into the kitchen. My daughter-in-law is a beautiful woman, I'll give her that. Always perfectly made up. Always dressed in the latest fashion. But she has never been warm. She didn't ask if I needed help. She didn't offer to chop a vegetable or set the table. She just leaned against the doorframe, holding a cup of coffee, looking at the mess on the counter with a wrinkled nose. "It smells like grease in here, Alice," she said. She never calls me Mom. The smell is going to get into the drapes in the living room. "It's Christmas, Jimmy," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "It smells like dinner. Are the potatoes peeled?" She sighed, a long, dramatic exhale. "Alan is handling the rest. We need to talk to you, actually. Can you stop cooking for a second?" My stomach gave a little lurch. There was something in her tone. It wasn't the usual annoyance. It was colder. Sharper. Can it wait? I asked. The glaze needs to go on now, or the skin won't crisp. No, a male voice said. I turned around. Alan was standing behind Jimmy. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his shoes. He held a large manila envelope in his hands. He looked pale, almost sick. For a second, I was worried. Was he ill? Did he lose his job? What is it? I put the brush down. Is everything okay? Alan walked into the room, stepping around Jimmy. He placed the envelope on the island, right next to the bowl of brown sugar. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. Merry Christmas, Jimmy said, but there was no joy in it. Go on, Alan. Tell her. Alan took a deep breath. He finally looked up, but his eyes were empty. It was like looking at a stranger, wearing my son's face. Mom, things are changing. He started. His voice wavered, then firmed up. Jimmy is pregnant. My hands flew to my mouth. Oh, that's wonderful news. Finally, I moved to hug him, but he took a step back. My arms fell to my sides. We're happy, he said, but he didn't smile. But with the baby coming, we need to rethink the living arrangements. Rethink? I was confused. The house is huge, Alan. There are 3 bedrooms upstairs. The baby can have the yellow room. I can help with the nursery. Jimmy laughed. It was a short, dry sound. It's not just the nursery, Alice. We need a playroom. And Alan needs a home office. And honestly, we need privacy. Having you right downstairs. It's a lot. I stay in my suite, I argued. I barely come out unless I'm cooking or cleaning for you. We need the suite, Jimmy cut in. We're going to knock down the wall. We want to turn that space into a home gym and a larger guest area for when my parents visit. I felt the blood drain from my face. Your parents? But I live there. Alan tapped the envelope on the counter. That's what this is, Mom. We've typed it up so everything is clear. We're giving you 30 days. That's more than the law requires. Actually, usually it's only 15 days for a month-to-month tenant. Tenant. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Tenant. I whispered. Alan, I'm not a tenant. I'm your mother. And I bought this house. I paid for every brick of this place. Alan crossed his arms. It was a defensive posture. I knew that look. It was the same look he had when he broke a window playing baseball when he was 10. But he wasn't 10 anymore. He was a 40-year-old man evicting his mother on Christmas. You gave me a gift, Mom, Alan said. His voice was steady now, rehearsed. You gave me the money to buy a house. I bought a house. The deed is in my name. The mortgage, what little there is left of it, is in my name. The utility bills are in my name. Because you said it was for taxes. I cried out. You promised I could live here until I died. You said this was our home. Plans change, Jimmy said, inspecting her fingernails. We have a family to think about now. Our real family. You're just taking up space. And honestly, Alice, you're depressing to have around. You're always talking about the past. I looked at my son. I was begging him with my eyes to stop this joke, to tell Jimmy to be quiet, to tell me that he would never throw me on the street. Alan, I said, my voice shaking, I have nowhere to go. I have no savings. I gave it all to you. If I leave, I have nothing. Alan shrugged. A simple, casual shrug. You have Social Security. You can find a little apartment, maybe a senior center. You'll figure it out. You're resourceful. He pushed the envelope toward me across the granite. 30 days, he said. But honestly, if you could be out sooner, it would be better. We have contractors coming on the 1st of the month to start the demolition. I stared at the envelope. Inside was my eviction. My own son, my flesh and blood, was throwing me out like garbage because he wanted a gym. But I paid for this house. I whispered again. the reality refusing to sink in. Alan looked me dead in the eye. A sneer curled his lip, a look I had never seen before. It was a look of absolute power. "On paper, it's mine," he said coldly. "You're just a guest. And the party is over." He turned his back on me and walked to the fridge to get a beer. Jimmy smirked, picked up a piece of the raw carrot I had chopped, bit into it loudly, and walked out of the room. I stood there alone in the kitchen. The ham was sizzling in the oven. The smell of Christmas filled the air, but I felt cold, freezing cold. I looked at the envelope, and I realized that the son I loved didn't exist anymore. He had been replaced by this monster, and I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do. I didn't stay for 30 days. I didn't even stay for 30 hours. The paper Alan had placed on the counter said I had a month to vacate, but the atmosphere in that house turned poisonous the moment the words eviction left his mouth. The air felt thick, heavy with things unsaid, and resentments finally spoken aloud. I couldn't breathe in that kitchen anymore. I couldn't look at the granite island I had paid for without feeling a physical ache in my chest. I went to my room, the in-law suite that was about to become a gym, and closed the door. But walls don't block out everything. I could hear them in the living room. I heard the clinking of beer bottles. I heard Jimmy laughing. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was a victorious one. They were celebrating. They had finally done it. The problem of Alice was handled. An hour later, my door flew open. Jimmy didn't knock. She walked in holding a roll of black, heavy-duty trash bags. She tossed them onto my bed. The plastic roll hit my quilt with a dull thud. "We need to start measuring for the remodel tomorrow," she said, her voice flat. "I need this closet cleared out. Today. I don't want your old coats and mothball-smelling dresses in here when the contractors arrive." "Jimmy," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed, "I have 30 days. The paper said 30 days. "Do you really want to stay where you aren't wanted, Alice?" she asked, arching a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Do you want to eat breakfast with us, knowing we want you gone? Do you want to watch Alan pretend to be polite? It's pathetic. Just go. Make it easier on everyone." She was right, and that's what hurt the most. I stood up and grabbed the trash bags. I didn't have suitcases. I had given my old luggage to Goodwill years ago because I thought I was never moving again. I thought I was home. So I began to pack my life into garbage bags. Every item I touched brought back a memory, and with every memory came a fresh wave of nausea. I packed the photo albums of Alan's childhood. There he was at 5, missing his front tooth, holding a fish he caught with his father. I remembered that day. Frank had been so proud. I remembered working an extra shift that weekend just to pay for the fishing trip because money was tight. I thought about those shifts. I worked as an RN for 40 years. After Frank died, I didn't slow down. I sped up. I worked nights. I worked holidays. I worked doubles on my feet until my veins throbbed and my back screamed, just so I could pay for Alan's tuition. I wanted him to start life without debt. I wanted him to be free. I remembered the day he graduated. I had worn a blue dress that cost more than I usually spend on clothes because I wanted to look like a mother he could be proud of. He had hugged me then. He had said, "I couldn't have done this without you, Mom." When did that gratitude turn into entitlement? I looked at the trash bag in my hand. It was half full of my clothes. I realized now that I had created this monster. I had shielded him from every hardship. When he couldn't pay his car note, I paid it. When he wanted a wedding he couldn't afford, I dipped into my retirement. I taught him that my money was his money. I taught him that my comfort came second to his desires. And Jimmy, she had seen that weakness. She was a predator who had spotted wounded prey. I could hear her voice in my head from over the years, subtle digs I had ignored. Your mom is so clingy, Alan. Your mom treats you like a child, Alan. She had been whispering poison in his ear for 5 years, slowly isolating him, convincing him that my love was actually a burden. And today, the poison had finally done its job. It took me 2 hours to pack the essentials. I left the furniture. I left the paintings on the walls. I left the curtains I had sewn myself. I only took what I could carry. I dragged 4 heavy black bags to the front door. I looked back at the living room. Alan was sitting on the sofa watching a football game. He didn't turn around. He turned up the volume. He knew I was leaving. He just didn't want to watch. Coward. I opened the front door and stepped out. Of course, it was raining. A cold, gray drizzle that soaked through my blouse instantly. I dragged the bags down the driveway, the plastic scraping loudly against the concrete. That's when I saw Mrs. Gable. She lived next door. We had coffee together every Tuesday morning. She was watering her porch plants, sheltered by her awning. She looked up and saw me, wet, disheveled, dragging trash bags to my 10-year-old sedan like a criminal fleeing a crime scene. She froze. I froze. I wanted to wave. I wanted to call out, "It's just spring cleaning." But the lie stuck in my throat. She could see the bags. She could see the car trunk popping open. She could see that I was crying. The shame was hotter than fire. I was a respectable woman. I was a retired nurse. I was a churchgoer. And here I was being thrown out of my own home like I was trash. I saw Mrs. Gable hesitate. Then she quickly turned her back and went inside her house. She didn't want to embarrass me by watching, but that rejection hurt worse than staring. I was now a pariah. I shoved the bags into the trunk and slammed it shut. I got into the driver's seat, my hands shaking so hard I could barely put the key in the ignition. I backed out of the driveway, taking one last look at the house. The Christmas lights were twinkling in the window. My house, my money, my life. I drove. I didn't know where I was going, so I just drove until I saw a neon sign flickering near the highway. The Suncoast Motel. It looked cheap. It looked safe enough. I walked into the lobby. It smelled of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. The clerk, a young man with piercings in his eyebrow, didn't look up from his phone when I asked for a room. $60 a night. He grunted. I pulled out my debit card. My hand hovered over the machine. I knew the balance. I had checked it yesterday to see if I could afford to buy Alan a new watch for Christmas. I had $412 to my name. Social Security wouldn't deposit for another week. I had given Alan $40,000 6 months ago for a business investment that never materialized. That was my emergency fund. Gone. I swiped the card. One night, I whispered. The room was small. The carpet was sticky. The bedspread had a cigarette burn in the center. I sat on the edge of the mattress, listening to the cars rushing by on the highway outside. I felt small. I felt stupid. I felt utterly, completely alone. I stared at my phone. There was one person I could call, one person who would answer, but she was also the one person who had warned me. My sister, Jeanette. Jeanette was a retired federal judge. She was tough, cynical, and brilliant. When I sold my house to buy Alan's, Jeanette had refused to come to the housewarming. "You're making a mistake, Alice," she had told me. "Never give up your leverage, not even for blood." I had called her bitter. I had told her she didn't understand what it was like to be a mother. We hadn't spoken properly in months. Calling her now meant admitting she was right. It meant swallowing the last shred of pride I had left. But as I looked around the dingy motel room, watching the rain streak the dirty window, I realized pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. I needed help. I needed someone who wouldn't look at me with pity, but with a plan. I dialed the number. My heart hammered against my ribs. It rang once, twice. Hello. Her voice was sharp, clear, and commanding. Just hearing it made me burst into tears. Jeanette. I choked out, my voice breaking into a sob I couldn't hold back. Jeanette, please. I made a mistake. He threw me out. He took everything. There was a silence on the other end, a long, terrifying silence. I held my breath, waiting for the "I told you so," waiting for the judgment. Where are you? Jeanette asked. Her voice wasn't angry. It was terrifyingly calm. I'm at a motel off. 75. I wept. I have trash bags. Jeanette, all I have are trash bags. Stay there, she said. Lock the door. Don't speak to anyone. I'm getting in the car. I'm coming to get you. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, trembling. I was still crying, but for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt something other than despair. I felt the tiny, flickering spark of a fight. My sister was coming. And God help Alan when she arrived. I sat on the edge of the lumpy motel mattress, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, counting the seconds. It had been 4 hours since I called Jeanette. 4 hours of replaying every mistake I had made over the last 5 years. Every time I signed a check for Alan. Every time I nodded when Jimmy made a passive-aggressive comment. Every time I told myself, it's okay, they're family. I felt like a fool. A 68-year-old fool with nothing to show for a lifetime of hard work but a trunk full of trash bags. Then, there was a sharp rap on the door. It wasn't the hesitant knock of a maid. It was 3 distinct, authoritative strikes. The sound of a gavel. I opened the door, and there she was, Jeanette. Even at 70, my sister was a force of nature. She was wearing a crisp linen pantsuit despite the humidity, and her silver hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She didn't look like a grandmother. She looked like what she was, a retired federal judge who had spent 30 years staring down liars and criminals. She took one look at me, my swollen eyes, my wrinkled blouse, and her expression softened for a fraction of a second. She stepped inside and pulled me into a hug. It wasn't a warm, fuzzy hug. Jeanette didn't do fuzzy. It was a firm, solid embrace, like she was physically holding me together because she knew I was falling apart. You look terrible, Alice, she said, pulling back and handing me a clean handkerchief from her purse. But you're safe. Now sit down. We have work to do. She didn't ask how I felt. She didn't offer platitudes. She walked to the small round table by the window, pulled out a disinfectant wipe, cleaned the surface, and then opened her leather briefcase. Show me, she commanded. I handed her the eviction notice Alan had given me. My hands were shaking. Jeanette put on her reading glasses and read the document in silence. Her face was a mask of stone. She didn't gasp. She didn't shake her head. She just read. And the deed, she asked, not looking up. It's in his name, I whispered, the shame burning my throat again. Jeanette, I was so stupid. He told me it was for tax purposes. He said it would protect the asset. I signed the quitclaim deed 5 years ago. I gave him the money for the purchase, but the title, it's all him. I buried my face in my hands. I have no rights. I know that. I watched those court shows. If his name is on the paper, it's his house. I'm just an old woman he lets stay there out of charity. I can't fight him. The room was silent for a long moment. Then I heard a sound I didn't expect. Jeanette chuckled. It was a cold, dry sound. I looked up. She had taken off her glasses and was looking at me with a terrifying glint in her eyes. It wasn't pity. It was the look of a hunter who just spotted a limping deer. Alice, she said, her voice calm and smooth. You are a wonderful nurse, but you are a terrible lawyer. Stop taking legal advice from television. She tapped a manicured fingernail on the table. You think because his name is on a piece of paper, he owns everything? You think the law is that simple? She leaned forward. There is something in the law called a constructive trust. There is also something called unjust enrichment. And in the state of Florida, there are very specific, very severe statutes regarding elder financial exploitation. I blinked, wiping my eyes. What does that mean? It means, she said, enunciating every word, that if you gave him money or property based on a promise, even a verbal one, that you would be cared for, and he breaks that promise, he has committed fraud. He hasn't just been mean, Alice. He has stolen from you. The law doesn't look kindly on children who trick their aging parents out of their life savings and then kick them to the curb. Hope, painful and sharp, flared in my chest. So we can sue him? We can get the house back. We can, Jeanette said, and then her face darkened. But not yet. She stood up and paced the small room. Here's the problem. It is she said, situation. You say you gave him the money with the condition that you live there forever. He will say it was a gift, a generous, unconditional gift from a loving mother. And since you signed that deed, the burden of proof is on us. She turned to face me. If we file a lawsuit today, he will lawyer up. He will claim you are senile. He will claim you are bitter because of the baby. He will hide the money. He will drag this out for 2 years, and you will run out of money before we ever see a courtroom. My heart sank again. So we can't win? I didn't say that. Jeanette smiled. It was a smile that made me glad I was her sister and not her defendant. I said we can't sue yet. We need evidence. We need him to admit that the money wasn't a gift. We need him to admit that the arrangement was a transaction. He'll never admit that. I said, Alan is arrogant, but he isn't stupid. Jimmy watches every word he says. Alan is arrogant, Jeanette corrected, and that is exactly how we are going to catch him. Arrogant men get sloppy when they think they have won. When they think their victim is weak, they stop looking over their shoulder. She sat back down and took my hand. Alice, listen to me closely. This is going to be the hardest thing I have ever asked you to do. You want to scream at him. You want to tell him he is an ungrateful brat. You want to demand justice. I nodded. I do. I want to hurt him like he hurt me. You can't, she said firmly. If you fight him now, his guard goes up. For this to work, we have to move in silence. We have to be the pathetic, defeated old ladies he thinks we are. She outlined the plan. It was twisted. It was brilliant. We are going to go back to the house, she said. Not to fight, to surrender. We are going to apologize. We are going to tell him he is right. We are going to tell him that we respect his decision to put his real family first. I can't say that, I protested, revulsion rising in my throat. I can't tell Jimmy she won. You will, Jeanette said, her voice hard as steel. You will swallow your pride. Alice, you will let them gloat. You will let them sip their wine and laugh at you. Because when people gloat, they talk. And when they talk, they tell the truth, because they don't think anyone who matters is listening. She reached into her purse and pulled out her smartphone. She tapped the screen and showed me the voice recorder app. We need one sentence, she said. We need him to acknowledge that you paid for the house and that he knows it wasn't a gift. Once we have that on tape, combined with the bank records, I'm going to subpoena. We have him. We will turn his own arrogance into the noose that hangs him. I looked at my sister. I saw the fire in her eyes. For 5 years, I had let Alan and Jimmy walk all over me because I wanted to keep the peace. I wanted to be the nice, supportive mother. And where had it gotten me? In a motel room with trash bags. Jeanette was right. Being nice was over. Okay, I said, my voice steady for the first time all day. I'll do it. I'll play the victim. Jeanette nodded, satisfied. She closed her briefcase with a sharp snap. Good. Wash your face. Put on some lipstick. We aren't staying in this dump. You're coming to my hotel. We need to rest, because in a few days, we are going to pay your son a visit, and we are going to let him think he has destroyed you. She stood up and opened the door to the rainy parking lot. He wants space, she said, looking back at me. We'll give him space. We'll give him enough rope to hang himself. I grabbed my purse and followed her out. I left the room key on the table. As I walked out into the rain, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a soldier who had just been given her marching orders. The silent revenge had begun. We waited exactly 1 week. Jeanette said that was the perfect amount of time. It was long enough for Alan and Jimmy to think we had given up, but short enough that their guard wouldn't be fully up yet. They would be in the honeymoon phase of their victory. I sat in the passenger seat of Jeanette's sensible sedan, wringing my hands in my lap. We were parked a block away from the house. My house. Or, I suppose, Alan's house now. Stop it, Jeanette said sharply, though she didn't look at me. She was checking her reflection in the rearview mirror. Stop fidgeting. You need to look tired, Alice. You need to look like a woman who has spent the last week crying in a cheap hotel room and has accepted her defeat. I am tired, I said honestly, and I have been crying. Good. Use it, she said. She reached over and adjusted my collar, making it look slightly askew. Remember the plan. Do not get angry. Do not defend yourself. If Jimmy insults you, you take it. If Alan lies, you nod. We are not here to win an argument. We are here to get a confession. She picked up her purse. It was a large, structured leather bag. She opened the clasp, checked her phone, tapped the screen once, and then slid it into the outer pocket. The top of the phone was just barely visible, the microphone facing out. The recording is running, she whispered. From this moment on, we are on stage. We drove the final block. As we pulled into the driveway, my stomach turned over. There was a massive roll-off dumpster sitting in the driveway, right on top of the oil stains my husband's truck used to leave. It was filled with debris, bits of drywall, broken 2x4s, and rolls of carpet. My carpet, the beige Berber I had installed 3 years ago because it was durable and soft on the grandkids' knees, if I ever had them. Now it was trash. Steady, Jeanette murmured as she killed the engine. We walked to the front door. I instinctively reached for my keys, then remembered I had left them on the kitchen counter the day I walked out. I had to ring the doorbell of the house I paid for. It took a long time for someone to answer. Finally, the door swung open. It was Jimmy. She was wearing a silk robe, even though it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday. She held a glass of white wine in one hand. Her hair was wrapped in a towel. She looked relaxed, pampered, and utterly unbothered by the fact that she had destroyed my life. "Oh," she said, her lip curling slightly. "It's you. I thought you'd send movers." "I couldn't afford movers, Jimmy," I said, keeping my voice low and trembling just as Jeanette had instructed. "We just came for the last few boxes in the garage, the ones with the photo albums." "Well, make it quick," she said, stepping back to let us in. "We have an architect coming at 4 to discuss the pool. I don't want you cluttering up the driveway when he gets here." We stepped inside. The house smelled different already. The scent of my potpourri was gone, replaced by the smell of sawdust and Jimmy's expensive, cloying perfume. Alan was in the living room. He was sitting in Frank's old leather recliner, the one I couldn't bear to part with, watching a golf tournament. He had a beer on the side table. He didn't stand up when we entered. He just glanced over his shoulder. "Hey, Mom," he said casually. "Aunt Jeanette. Didn't know you were in town. I came to help your mother settle her affairs." Jeanette said, Her voice was unrecognizable. She sounded old. She sounded frail. She sounded beaten. It's been a very hard week, Alan. Alan took a sip of his beer. Yeah, well, it had to happen. We all need to move on. I know, Jeanette sighed, clutching her purse tightly against her chest. We went to see a lawyer, actually. Alan froze. Jimmy stopped swirling her wine. The tension in the room spiked instantly. This was the moment. If Jeanette pushed too hard, they would kick us out. And Alan asked, his voice tight, and he told us you were right. Jeanette said, hanging her head. He said the deed is ironclad. You own the house, Alan. There's nothing Alice can do. We just wasted $500 for him to tell us we lost. Alan let out a loud, barking laugh. He slapped his knee. The relief that washed over him was palpable. He sat up straighter, his arrogance inflating like a balloon. I told you, Mom, he said, shaking his head at me. I did my research. I'm not an idiot. I knew exactly how to structure this, so there wouldn't be any issues later. You were very smart, Alan, Jeanette said softly. Cruel, maybe, but very smart. It's not cruel, it's business. Jimmy chimed in, walking over to sit on the arm of his chair. She looked at me up and down. Honestly, Alice, look at you. You look homeless. It's embarrassing. Maybe you should use that Social Security check for some new clothes instead of legal fees. I bit the inside of my cheek, so hard I tasted copper. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that my homeless look was because I was sleeping on a hotel sofa, so she could have a pool. But Jeanette squeezed my arm. Stick to the script. We just want to get the boxes and go, Jeanette said. But Alan, I just have one question, for my own peace of mind. I'm your aunt. I've known you since you were a baby. She took a step closer to him. Did you ever plan to pay her back? She asked. Her voice was sad, not accusatory. The $400,000 she gave you to buy this place, did you ever intend to return it, or was this the plan all along? Alan looked at Jimmy. Then he looked at me. He was feeling safe. He had won. The lawyers said so. He took a long swig of his beer and shrugged. Look, Aunt Jeanette, he said, leaning back, expanding his chest. Yeah, she paid for it. I'm not denying that she wrote the check. But that money was a gift. That's what we told the bank, right? It was a gift to help her son get a start in life. But $400,000, Alan? Jeanette pressed gently. That was her entire life savings. Surely you knew she needed that to survive. She has a pension, Alan dismissed. Look, the house is in my name. Possession is 9/10 of the law. If she was dumb enough to sign it over without a contract, that's on her. I did what I had to do for my family. It's my house now. End of story. So you acknowledge she paid for it, but you're keeping it because the paper says you can? Jeanette clarified, her voice barely a whisper. Exactly, Alan said, grinning. It's legal, Aunt Jeanette. You were a judge. You know how it works. The law doesn't care about feelings. It cares about signatures. And I have the signature. I suppose you do, Jeanette said. She looked at me. Come on, Alice. Let's get the albums. We've taken up enough of their time. I looked at my son one last time. He was already turning back to the TV. He didn't care. He truly, deeply didn't care that he had robbed me. He felt entitled to my ruin. We walked to the garage in silence. We grabbed 2 boxes of photos. We walked back out past the living room. Bye, Mom. Alan called out without looking. Don't come back without calling first. Okay? Bye. Alan, I whispered. We walked out to the car. Jimmy closed the door behind us before we were even off the porch. I heard the lock click. We got into the car. Jeanette didn't start the engine immediately. She reached into her purse and pulled out the phone. She tapped the screen to stop the recording. She pressed play. Alan's voice, clear as day, filled the quiet car. Yeah, she paid for it. But that money was a gift. Possession is 9/10 of the law. If she was dumb enough to sign it over without a contract, that's on her. Jeanette hit pause. She looked at me, and for the first time in a week, she smiled. A real smile. He just confessed to constructive fraud and unjust enrichment. She said, her eyes dancing. He admitted the money came from you, and he admitted he is using a legal technicality to keep it. In a court of equity, he just hung himself. I let out a breath. I felt like I had been holding since Christmas. Did we get him? Oh, Alice, Jeanette said, starting the car. We didn't just get him. We are going to bury him. She put the car in reverse. As we backed out of the driveway, past the dumpster filled with my life, I didn't feel sad anymore. I looked at the house and thought about the pool. They were planning. Go ahead, Alan. Dig the hole. You're just digging your own grave. For the next 3 weeks, we were ghosts. I was living in Jeanette's guest bedroom in her condo in Fort Lauderdale. It was a lovely room, painted a soft seafoam green, with a view of the Intracoastal Waterway. It was peaceful, but I felt like an intruder. I was 68 years old, sleeping in my big sister's spare room because I had been foolish enough to trust my own son. Every time I used Jeanette's shampoo or ate her food, I felt a pang of guilt. I should have been in my own home. I should have been independent. Jeanette, however, didn't have time for my guilt. She was a woman on a mission. She had turned her dining room table into a war room. Stacks of files, bank statements, and legal pads covered every inch of the mahogany surface. She spent hours on the phone, her voice low and sharp, speaking a language of statutes and precedents that I barely understood. While she worked, I watched. I watched my former life unravel through the glowing screen of my iPad. We hadn't blocked Alan or Jimmy on social media. Jeanette had forbidden it. We need to see what they are doing, she had said. Evidence isn't always found in a filing cabinet, Alice. Sometimes it's posted on Facebook for the whole world to see. And oh, did they post? It started 2 days after we visited the house. Jimmy posted a photo of a brand new white Tesla Model X parked in my driveway. The gull wing doors were open, and she was posing next to it with a glass of champagne. The caption read, "New ride for the new chapter. So blessed to finally have the life we deserve. Hashtag hard work pays off. Hashtag blessed." I stared at the screen, my hand trembling. Hard work. She hadn't worked a day since she married Alan. That car cost more than I used to make in 2 years of nursing, and I knew exactly where the money came from. They were borrowing against the house. My house. Jeanette looked over my shoulder and made a note on her legal pad. Good, she muttered. They're spending equity. Keep screenshots of everything, Alice. A week later, it got worse. I saw a video on Jimmy's Instagram story. It was taken from the back porch. In the background, there was a loud mechanical roaring sound. A massive yellow excavator was in the backyard. It was tearing up the earth. I watched in horror as the metal bucket slammed into the soil, ripping up the roots of my prize-winning rose bushes. I had planted those roses in memory of Frank. They were Mr. Lincoln tea roses, his favorite deep red color. I had tended to them every morning for 5 years. They were the only living things I had left of my husband. In the video, Jimmy was laughing. "Bye-bye, ugly jungle," she yelled over the noise of the machine. "Hello, saltwater pool." I dropped the iPad on the sofa and wept. It felt like a physical blow. They weren't just renovating. They were erasing me. They were scrubbing every trace of Alice Green from the property, treating my memories like weeds to be pulled. Jeanette came out of the dining room when she heard me crying. She watched the video, her face tightening into that scary, stone-cold expression. "Let them dig," she said, handing me a tissue. "They are digging a hole. All right, but it's not for a pool. That afternoon, a man came to the condo. Jeanette introduced him as Mr. Sterling. He didn't look like the friendly neighborhood lawyers I had met in the past. He wore a suit that looked sharper than a knife blade, and he didn't smile. He was a real estate litigator. A shark, Jeanette called him. He sat down at the table and laid out a timeline. They took out a home equity line of credit. A HELOC last week, Mr. Sterling said, sliding a bank document across the table. Based on the appraisal of the house, the bank gave them access to $150,000. They've already drawn down $80,000. That's the car and the pool contractor. He's spending my equity, I said, feeling sick. By the time we get the house back, it will be mortgaged to the hilt. I'll inherit a debt I can't pay. That is exactly why we are acting now, Jeanette said. We waited for them to start spending because it proves bad faith. It proves they are treating the asset as their personal piggy bank despite knowing, because of our recording, that the money was yours. Mr. Sterling opened a thick folder. We aren't filing a simple eviction dispute, Mrs. Green. That's small claim stuff. We are filing a multi-count civil lawsuit in the circuit court. He pointed to the first document. Count 1, constructive fraud. We are arguing that Alan used his confidential relationship with you, mother and son, to trick you into signing the deed. He pointed to the second. Count 2, unjust enrichment. He has been enriched by your money without giving you any compensation, which is against equity and good conscience. He pointed to the third, and this was the big one. Count 3, reformation of deed. We are asking the judge to literally rewrite the history of the property ownership, putting your name back on the title as if it never left. And finally, Jeanette added, tapping the last paper, the lease pendens. The what? I asked. Lease pendens, Mr. Sterling explained. It's Latin for suit pending. As soon as I file this document with the county clerk tomorrow morning, it puts a public cloud on the title of the house. It warns the world that the ownership of the house is in dispute. He leaned back, a shark-like grin finally appearing. It means the bank freezes the HELOC. It means they can't sell the house. They can't refinance. They can't borrow another dime. The money spout turns off instantly. So the pool. I started. The pool contractor won't get his second check, Jeanette said with satisfaction. The work stops. They will be left with a giant muddy hole in the backyard and a half-finished job. And the Tesla? I asked. Well, they better hope they can make the payments with their actual salaries, Jeanette said, because they can't use your house as an ATM anymore. I looked at the stack of papers. It looked like a weapon. For weeks, I had felt helpless. I had felt like a victim. But looking at the work my sister and this lawyer had done, I realized I wasn't helpless. I was armed. Alan thinks I'm weak, I said softly. He thinks I'm just going to fade away into a nursing home. He thinks you are his mother, Jeanette said. He forgot that you are also a woman who worked double shifts for 20 years to survive. He forgot who he was dealing with. Mr. Sterling stood up and gathered the papers. I'll file these electronically at 8 a.m. tomorrow. By 9 a.m., the bank will be notified. By 10 a.m., Alan will get a call that his credit line is frozen. And by noon, the process server will be knocking on his door. Wait, I said. I remembered something Jimmy had posted earlier that morning. A digital invitation. Don't send the server at noon. Jeanette raised an eyebrow. Why not? They are having a party, I said. A housewarming and pool kickoff party. Jimmy invited the whole neighborhood. She invited Alan's boss. She wants to show off the renovations. I looked at Jeanette, and for the first time, I felt a flash of that cold anger she was so famous for. Send the server at 2 p.m., I said, right when the party is in full swing. If they want to humiliate me in front of the neighbors, let's see how they like it. Jeanette looked at me, stunned for a moment. Then she burst out laughing. I taught you well, Alice, she said. She turned to Mr. Sterling. You heard the client. 2 p.m. Make sure it's loud. Mr. Sterling nodded and left. I went back to the iPad. I looked at the picture of the excavator tearing up my roses. I touched the screen, tracing the petals of the flowers that were no longer there. Enjoy the party, Alan, I thought. Enjoy the champagne, because the hangover is going to be brutal. Saturday arrived with a bright, mocking sunshine that felt entirely inappropriate for a funeral. And that's what today was, though Alan and Jimmy didn't know it yet. It was the funeral of their reputation. Jeanette and I were parked 3 houses down the street in her sedan. We had arrived early, finding a spot under the shade of a large oak tree, where we wouldn't be immediately noticed. We had the windows rolled up and the air conditioning on low. We sat there like 2 spies in a movie, sipping iced tea from a thermos, watching the circus unfold at the house that used to be mine. It was painful to watch, I won't lie. The house looked different. The beautiful oak door I had picked out was covered in a gaudy wreath made of fake gold leaves. The driveway was packed, and there, gleaming in the center of it, all like a trophy, was the white Tesla. Alan and Jimmy had gone all out. They had hired a catering company. I saw servers in black vests walking up the driveway, carrying trays of shrimp cocktail and champagne flutes. They had set up white tents on the front lawn because the backyard was currently a mud pit from the halted pool excavation. Music was thumping from large speakers, some modern pop song with a heavy bass beat that rattled the windows of the neighbors. It was loud, aggressive, and flashy, just like Jimmy. Look at them, Jeanette said, pointing through the windshield. I looked. Alan was standing near the Tesla, holding a beer, laughing with a group of men in suits. One of them was Mr. Henderson, his boss at the regional sales office. Alan had been trying to impress Mr. Henderson for years, desperate for a promotion to VP. Jimmy was fluttering around in a white cocktail dress that looked like something a bride would wear. She was laughing, touching people's arms, playing the role of the wealthy hostess. She pointed to the house, then to the car, clearly bragging about their blessings. They have no idea, I whispered. They really think they got away with it. That's the beauty of it, Jeanette said, checking her watch. It's 1:58 p.m. 2 minutes. My heart started to race. Part of me, the mother part, wanted to run out of the car and scream, Alan, stop, hide. I didn't want to see my son destroyed. But then I remembered the rain. I remembered the trash bags. I remembered him looking me in the eye and saying, possession is 9/10 of the law. I stayed in my seat. At exactly 2 p.m., a gray sedan pulled up and double-parked right in front of the driveway, blocking the Tesla. A man got out. He wasn't a caterer. He wasn't a guest. He was a large man with broad shoulders, wearing a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit and sunglasses. He held a thick stack of papers bound with a rubber band. He didn't walk up the driveway tentatively. He marched. He walked right past the welcome sign Jimmy had put up. He walked right through the crowd of neighbors sipping their drinks. The music was loud, but not loud enough to drown out what happened next. Mrs. Gable, my neighbor who had watched me leave in shame weeks ago, was standing near the front. She told me later that the air shifted the moment the man walked onto the grass. People stopped talking. They sensed the intrusion. The man walked straight up to Alan. Alan was in the middle of a story, laughing, his hand on Mr. Henderson's shoulder. He stopped laughing when the man's shadow fell over him. Alan Green, the man asked. His voice was a boom. It carried across the lawn. Alan looked annoyed. Yeah? Who are you? The DJ is supposed to be in the back. I'm not the DJ, the man said. He slapped the thick packet of papers onto Alan's chest. Alan instinctively grabbed them to keep them from falling. "You are being served," the man announced. He didn't whisper. He projected like an actor on a stage. "Summons and complaint for civil theft, constructive fraud, and elder financial exploitation." The music seemed to cut out at that exact second. Maybe the song ended, or maybe someone hit pause, but the silence that followed was deafening. "Elder financial exploitation," the man repeated, making sure the words hung in the humid air. "You have 20 days to respond to the court." Alan's face went from annoyed to ghostly pale in a heartbeat. He looked at the papers. Then he looked at Mr. Henderson. His boss took a step back, his eyes wide. "In the corporate world, you can survive a lot of scandals, but stealing from your elderly mother, that is a special kind of poison. This is a mistake." Alan stammered, his voice cracking. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a high-pitched squeak. This is a prank. Who sent you? Was it Dave? Is this a joke?" "It's no joke, Mr. Green," the process server said, turning to leave. "And you might want to call your bank. The property is now under lease pendens." That was the trigger. Jimmy, who had been frozen near the shrimp platter, suddenly unpaused. She didn't faint. She didn't cry. She attacked. "Get out!" she screamed, rushing at the man. Her face was twisted, ugly with rage. "Get off my property! You can't be here. We're having a party." "Jimmy, stop!" Alan yelled, grabbing her arm, but the damage was done. "It's harassment." Jimmy shrieked, turning to the guests. "His mother is crazy. She's a senile old woman who's jealous of our success. She's trying to ruin us." The guests weren't looking at the server anymore. They were looking at Jimmy. They were hearing her scream about Alan's mother. And they were doing the math. The big house, the sudden renovation, the Tesla, the mother who suddenly moved to a retirement home last month. I saw Mr. Henderson set his champagne glass down on a passing tray. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't shake Alan's hand. He just turned around, signaled to his wife, and walked quickly toward his car. That started the stampede. Wealthy people do not like scenes. They do not like police, and they certainly do not like being adjacent to fraud. Within 3 minutes, the driveway was clearing out. People were mumbling excuses. Babysitter called, forgot the dog, early morning tomorrow. Mrs. Gable stayed the longest. She stood near the edge of the lawn, watching Alan and Jimmy arguing in the middle of their empty party. She looked up toward the street, toward the oak tree where we were parked. She couldn't see me through the tinted windows, but she gave a little nod anyway. Inside the car, I felt a strange sensation. My hands weren't shaking anymore. "He looks smaller," I said softly. "What?" Jeanette asked. "Alan," I said. "He always looked so big to me these last few years. So powerful. But standing there holding those papers, he looks like a scared little boy." "He's not a boy, Alice," Jeanette reminded me, putting the car in gear. "He's a defendant." We watched for another minute. Jimmy was now crying, kicking one of the tires of the Tesla. Alan was sitting on the front steps, his head in his hands, the lawsuit lying on the concrete next to him. The housewarming was over. The house was now a crime scene in the eyes of the neighborhood. "Let's go," I said. "I've seen enough." Jeanette nodded and pulled the car away from the curb. We drove past the house slowly. Neither Alan nor Jimmy looked up. They were too busy blaming each other. As we turned the corner, leaving my old street behind, I realized something. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel joy. Revenge isn't sweet, no matter what they say. It's bitter. But it was necessary. They had tried to bury me in shame. They had tried to make me disappear. But today, in front of everyone they tried to impress, they learned the most important lesson of all. You can steal a house. You can steal money. But you cannot steal the truth. And the truth had just arrived, loud and clear. The courtroom smelled like lemon polish and old paper. It was colder than the morgue at the hospital where I used to work. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. Next to me, Mr. Sterling was arranging his files with surgical precision. On my other side sat Jeanette, looking as comfortable as if she were sitting on her own front porch. Across the aisle, at the defense table, sat my son. Alan was wearing a navy blue suit that I knew he had bought with my money. He wouldn't look at me. He was whispering furiously to his lawyer, a young man with too much gel in his hair, who looked more like a car salesman than a litigator. Jimmy was sitting in the gallery behind them, wearing a modest beige dress and a pair of oversized sunglasses, trying to look like a victim. I felt sick. A mother should never have to sit in a room and watch her child be treated like an enemy. But then I remembered the excavator tearing up my roses. I remembered the rain. I remembered the eviction notice on Christmas morning. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Judge Marilyn Vance walked in. Jeanette had told me about her. She was tough, fair, and had absolutely no patience for nonsense. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and looked down at the two tables. "We are here for the matter of Green versus Green," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it filled the room. "Let's proceed." Alan's lawyer stood up first. He buttoned his jacket and gave the judge a charming smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is a tragic family misunderstanding, but legally it is simple. My client, Alan Green, is the sole owner of the property. The deed is in his name. The plaintiff, his mother, claims she owns the house, but she signed a quitclaim deed 5 years ago. She gave the money for the purchase freely. It was a gift. And as we all know, you cannot take back a gift just because you have a falling out." He turned to look at me, his expression full of fake pity. "Mrs. Green is upset," he continued. "She is aging, and perhaps she is confused about the arrangement. But the law requires written evidence of a contract. There is none. There is only a deed, with my client's name on it." I wanted to stand up and scream. Confused? I was the head nurse of an ICU for 15 years. I wasn't confused. I was betrayed. Mr. Sterling stood up next. He didn't smile. "Your Honor," he said, "this isn't about a gift. This is about theft. This is about a son who manipulated his mother's trust to steal her life savings, and then discarded her when she became inconvenient." The trial moved quickly. Jeanette had told me that civil trials are boring compared to TV, but this didn't feel boring. It felt like open-heart surgery without anesthesia. Then came the moment we were waiting for. Mr. Sterling called Alan to the stand. Alan walked up to the witness box. He looked confident. He swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I watched him take that oath, knowing he was about to break it. "Mr. Green," Mr. Sterling asked, standing behind the podium, "you claim the $400,000 used to purchase the home was a gift from your mother?" "Yes," Alan said smoothly. "She wanted to help me out." "Help you out?" Mr. Sterling raised an eyebrow. $400,000 is a lot of help. Did you contribute any money to the purchase?" Alan shifted in his seat. "I contributed sweat equity. I managed the property." "But the cash," Mr. Sterling pressed. "Did you have the funds to buy a luxury home in Tampa 5 years ago?" "I was doing well." Alan lied. He lifted his chin. "I had investments. Crypto. Stocks. I didn't need her money, but she insisted. I used my own earnings to maintain the house." I gasped softly. "Crypto?" Alan didn't know a Bitcoin from a bubblegum wrapper. He was lying under oath to make himself look successful, to pretend he hadn't needed me. "So, to be clear," Mr. Sterling said, looking at the jury box, though there was no jury, just the judge, "you never admitted that the house was actually hers? You never acknowledged that the title holding was just a formality for tax purposes. Never, Alan said firmly. It's my house. It's always been my house. Mr. Sterling looked down at his notes. He waited a beat. The silence stretched out. Your Honor, Mr. Sterling said, quietly, I would like to introduce Plaintiff's Exhibit C, an audio recording taken on the afternoon of January 14th. Alan's confidence flickered. He looked at his lawyer, who looked confused. Jimmy sat up straighter in the back row. Mr. Sterling pressed a button on his laptop. The sound of Alan's voice filled the courtroom. It was loud, clear, and dripping with arrogance. Look, Aunt Jeanette, yeah, she paid for it. I'm not denying that she wrote the check. But that money was a gift. The house is in my name. Possession is 9/10 of the law. If she was dumb enough to sign it over without a contract, that's on her. The recording ended. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner. Alan's face turned a color I had never seen before, a mix of gray and green. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He looked at Jimmy, but she had her hand over her mouth, staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. Judge Vance slowly turned her chair to face Alan. She lowered her glasses. She didn't look like a judge anymore. She looked like a disappointed mother. Mr. Green, she said. Her voice was ice. Did you just lie to this court? Alan stammered. I didn't mean, it was out of context. You just testified that you never admitted the house was hers, the judge snapped. And I just heard you admit it. I also heard you call your mother dumb for trusting you. She looked at the defense lawyer. Do you have any explanation for this? The lawyer stood up, buttoning and unbuttoning his jacket nervously. Your Honor, my client was posturing. It was a private conversation. It was a confession. Judge Vance cut him off. It is an admission of constructive fraud. He admitted he knew the money wasn't a gift, and he admitted he was relying on a lack of contract to exploit the situation. She picked up her gavel. She didn't bang it. She just held it, looking at Alan with pure disgust. In this state, we protect our seniors, she said. We do not allow children to treat their parents like ATM machines. The doctrine of unjust enrichment is designed for exactly this scenario. Mr. Green, you have taken a home you did not pay for, and you have attempted to evict the woman who gave you everything. She looked down at her paperwork and began to write. I am issuing a ruling immediately, she declared. I am finding in favor of the plaintiff, Alice Green. I am ordering the reformation of deed. The quitclaim deed is hereby voided due to fraud and undue influence. The title of the property will revert to Alice Green, effective immediately. She wasn't done. Furthermore, she continued, her eyes boring into Alan. Since you decided to renovate a house you did not own, you are responsible for the debt incurred. The Hellick remains in your name. You will pay it back. And finally, you are ordered to pay the plaintiff's legal fees in full. Alan slumped in the witness chair. He looked like he had been punched in the stomach. He had lost the house. He was stuck with the debt. And he had been exposed as a liar in public record. Get out of my sight, Judge Vance said dismissively. Court is adjourned. Mr. Sterling shook my hand. Jeanette squeezed my shoulder. We did it, Alice, she whispered. It's over. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I walked toward the aisle. I had to pass the defense table to leave. Alan was standing there, stuffing papers into his briefcase. He looked up and saw me. His eyes were red. He looked pathetic. He looked like he wanted to say something, maybe an apology, maybe an excuse, maybe a plea for help. Mom, he started, his voice cracking. I stopped. I looked him in the eye. I didn't scream. I didn't tell him I hated him. I didn't smile in victory. I just looked at him. I looked at the face of the boy I had raised, the boy I had loved more than my own life, and I let him see exactly what he had broken. I let him see the disappointment. It wasn't anger. Anger fades. Disappointment is a stain that never washes out. I looked at him like he was a stranger I didn't want to know. "Goodbye, Alan," I said softly, and then I walked out of the courtroom, leaving him standing there with nothing but his debt and his shame. The silence in the house was the first thing I noticed. For 5 years, this house had been filled with the noise of Alan's video games, Jimmy's loud phone calls, and the constant hum of their demands. Now, standing in the foyer 3 days after the court verdict, the silence was absolute. I had my keys back. The deed was recorded in my name at the county clerk's office. I was the legal owner of 452 Maple Drive once again. But as I walked through the hallway, trailing my hand along the wall, I realized something sad. It didn't feel like my home anymore. Jimmy had left her mark on every square inch. She had painted my soft, yellow kitchen a stark, sterile gray. She had replaced my warm oak cabinets with high-gloss white ones that looked like a dentist's office. And out back, through the sliding glass doors, I saw the scar on the land, the massive, muddy hole where they had started digging their pool. It looked like a wound. I walked into the living room. There were boxes everywhere. Alan and Jimmy had moved out in a hurry. The court gave them 48 hours to vacate, and they took it seriously. But they had left behind the mess, the trash, the things they didn't want. I found a pile of unpaid bills on the counter. I picked one up. It was a statement for the home equity line of credit. The balance was terrifying, $80,000. But here was the beautiful, brutal justice of Judge Vance's ruling. That debt belonged to Alan. He had signed for the loan. He was the borrower. The bank had a lien on the house, yes, but Alan was personally liable for the payments. I sat down on the floor, right where my favorite armchair used to be before they threw it out. I thought about calling a contractor to fix the backyard. I thought about painting the kitchen back to yellow. I thought about buying new furniture and trying to settle back into my old life. But then I shook my head. No, you can't go backward. This house was poison for me. Every room held a memory of a disrespect or a hurtful word. If I stayed here, I would just be the old woman in the big house, haunted by ghosts. I called Mr. Sterling, the lawyer. "Sell it," I said. "Put it on the market today." The real estate market in Tampa was on fire. And ironically, Alan's investments paid off for me. The new kitchen, the updated bathrooms, the smart home wiring, even with the hole in the backyard, the house was worth significantly more than when we bought it. We listed it on a Friday. We had a cash offer by Sunday. A nice young couple from New York bought it. They loved the modern kitchen. They were excited to finish the pool. I signed the papers, and just like that, I was free. I walked away with a check that was bigger than my original life savings. Alan had spent my money, yes, but he had inadvertently increased my equity. He had tried to rob me, but he ended up funding my retirement. I didn't stay in Tampa. The city felt too humid, too heavy with memories. I looked west toward the Gulf of Mexico. I found a place in St. Petersburg, just 20 minutes from Jeanette. It wasn't a big house. It was a 2-bedroom condo on the 4th floor of a quiet building. It had a balcony that looked right out over the water. Moving day was easy. I bought new furniture, comfortable, soft furniture that I liked. I bought a new tea set. I filled the guest room with books and a sewing machine, not a gym for someone else. For the first time in 40 years, I answered to no one. I woke up when I wanted. I ate what I wanted. I spent my evenings sitting on the balcony with Jeanette, drinking wine and watching the sunset, laughing until our sides hurt. We were 2 old sisters who had fought a war and won. Then, 3 months later, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Jeanette usually texted before she came over. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. I sighed. I recognized the slumped shoulders instantly. I opened the door. Alan stood there. He looked 10 years older than he had in the courtroom. His suit was wrinkled. He hadn't shaved in a few days. He held a small duffel bag in his hand, the same kind of bag I had packed when he kicked me out. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice was rough. "Alan," I said, keeping the screen door latched between us. "How did you find me?" "Aunt Jeanette told me," he mumbled. "Well, she told me the building. She didn't give me the apartment number. I had to wait in the lobby until someone let me in." He looked past me into the bright, airy living room. He saw the ocean view. He saw the peace. "It's nice," he said. "Really nice." "Thank you," I said. He shifted his weight. "Mom, things are bad. Jimmy left." I didn't blink. I assumed she would. "She filed for divorce the day the bank started garnishing my wages for the renovation loan," he said bitterly. "She said she didn't sign up for debt. She's already dating some guy in Miami. A developer." He looked at me, his eyes filling with tears. "I lost everything, Mom. The house, the car, the wife. I'm staying on a friend's couch, but he says I have to leave by Monday. I'm bankrupt." He took a step closer to the screen. "I was wondering," he started, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You have a second bedroom, right? I could just stay for a few weeks, just until I get back on my feet. I can help you around the place. I can carry groceries. I won't be a burden. I promise." I looked at him. I remembered the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard, but I also remembered the man who told me on Christmas morning that I was just a guest. I remembered Jimmy saying, "We need our privacy." I felt a pang of pity. Of course, he was my son. But pity is a dangerous thing. Pity is what got me evicted in the first place. I had learned my lesson. I had learned that my peace was not a renewable resource. Once it's gone, it's hard to get back. I looked at his duffel bag. Then I looked at his face. "I'm sorry you're going through that, Alan," I said gently. "I really am. It sounds very painful." "So, can I come in?" he asked, reaching for the handle. I put my hand on the lock. "No," I said. He froze. "What?" "Mom, it's me. It's Alan." "I know who you are," I said, "but this is my home, and I have built a life here that I love. I am not going to risk that again." "But I have nowhere to go," he cried, his voice rising. "I'm family." "I know," I said. I took a sip of the tea. I was holding. It was warm and sweet. "But you know what, Alan? I've finally realized something important." I smiled. It wasn't a mean smile. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated freedom. "I'm finally enjoying my peace," I told him, echoing the words he had thrown at me so carelessly months ago. "And I realized I really need my space." His jaw dropped. He recognized the words. He saw the irony hit him like a physical slap. "Mom, please," he whispered. "Goodbye, Alan," I said. I closed the heavy oak door. I turned the deadbolt. Click. I stood there for a moment, listening. I heard his footsteps pause, then slowly, heavily walk away down the hall. I walked back out to the balcony where the ocean breeze was blowing. I sat down, picked up my book, and took a deep breath of the salty air. I was alone. I was safe. And for the first time in a very long time, I was home. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.